Radio Row in New Orleans, Louisiana. Super Bowl week, baby. Eagles and Chiefs rematch. Some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment will be right here. Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. It's the Jake Asman Show.
Jake Asman Show, live from New Orleans. And, man, do we have something I think the Jet fan base is going to be very, very interested in. A conversation with the former general manager of the Atlanta Falcons, the president of Sumer Sports, and the first of about 1,000 candidates to interview for the Jets GM job, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, appreciate you joining the show.
Great to be here. No, that was a long process for sure. I know you guys were tracking it. I've never seen a fan base track that GM and head coaching search like that. It was amazing.
We are a crazy fan base, and I just want to be transparent with you, Thomas. You were the guy that I wanted to get the job. I wanted someone with previous experience, either a head coach or GM, ideally both. And when you were the first to interview for the job, right away I'm like, great. That is a great start to this, and I was very intrigued by it. And then, you know, from a fan perspective, we never heard your name again the remainder of the process. Can you kind of take us inside what you were hearing from them, how it played out, where you were the first to interview, and then we go a month of all these other interviews and eventually a decision's made?
Yeah, look, this was one of those situations at the outset. I was told and I thought that they were interested in an experienced guy for sure. So it was one of the reasons why I obviously took the interview and wanted to be a part of that. I have a great deal of respect for Jaime Eli, as well as, the group that was put together. I'm talking about Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman. They are football people, so I knew that it was going to be an in-depth, intense approach to everything. And it was, those early interviews, albeit 3 hours, they were early interviews, right? You never know, right? Those of us can argue. Sometimes it's like, oh, I want to be the first interview or I want to be the last, because you might be out of sight, out of mind. That was the first one. John Robinson, as you know, another experienced guy, was, I think, the next interview. So that went, look.
Were you in person when you did this interview?
I was, yeah, I was. And it was a really good interview. I left feeling good about it, meaning I really liked the way that I communicated with Woody Johnson and Jaime, as well as the guys. And I thought it was one of those things that, again, thinking about experience, I thought it was going to be a really good opportunity. I literally, having come from Atlanta, and that's what I went into there, right? It was a resurrection situation, when we went into Atlanta back in 2008, it was coming off the Michael Vick debacle. Right. We needed to regroup everything.
And you guys won 11 games. You drafted Matt Ryan.
Right.
It was
exactly right. Yeah.
So I pushed hard for you. I'm telling you, I knew the whole bio. I wanted to.
I appreciate that. But that's one of those things you just never know. Ultimately, it's about the fit and the feel. And these hirings these days are really intense. There's a lot going on. This was a very big group of people they were interviewing on it, of course. But I have respect for the org, and most important, I want to say, I really do believe this. And I've known Darren Mougey for a while, and I really like him. He's a football guy. He's the opposite end of the spectrum as far as time, in the saddle, of course, which I think, look, I got my first shot right around 39. I was 40 years old. I think that's a good age, and I think he's a good guy, and he's got a tough element to him, which I think is good as well. And so I wish him all the luck. And then, you haven't even started asking me about the coaching situation yet.
No, well, I have so many questions for you about this process, because as a longtime fan of this team and everything that came out this past year about the owners, reported involvement, and just being a fan of this team that hasn't made the playoffs in 14 years, there were a lot of Jet fans, myself included, that were rightfully skeptical about this owner hiring people to do this job and do it well and finally end this playoff drought. For you going in there, you mentioned that you were impressed by the football people that were involved. What was your experience like with ownership, though? Talking with Woody and Chris, did you get a sense that they were truly open-minded to all these different candidates they were speaking to, or the process? Like, just kind of take us inside your vibe with some of the things you were being asked by ownership.
Yeah, no question. I mean, that was one of my main reasons to go down and go in person, and to really, what I really wanted to do is kick it off and find out how I interacted with the owner and Woody Johnson and Christopher Johnson as well. And I got a chance to spend, a good hour and a half in that setting, with Woody and interacting with him. And I thought it went really, really well. I mean, the proper approach was communicative, and I thought there was enough levity there, which was right. We were making really good eye contact, and we hit it off well, I thought. But again, there's so many people involved in those kind of searches, especially at that level, and you might have hit it off well at 6 weeks before the end of the process, and that's a long way away. And ultimately, the owner's going to have his decision on who he bonded with more, and obviously bonded with someone with in a different spot in his career.
I've always wondered this in GM interviews, and obviously you could speak to it. Are you going in there with an idea of, hey, like, if I got this job, these are the coaches I'd want to talk to. These are the people that I'd want to interview. Like, how detailed was your plan for this interview? Like, did you have a whole off-season blueprint mapped out for what you would do if you were the general manager of the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, it's an intense preparation. You can't just walk in, and just throw it down on a piece of paper. I mean, this is something that you prepare a lot for. And quite honestly, prepared a lot after, the weeks, almost a month after. I mean, every day I'm preparing on next elements that I'm working on. So it's an intense deal. Yes, on the coaching side, I mean, usually when you're a general manager going in, you want to have communication. Excuse me, I keep pulling away from this microphone. You want to have direct communication with some of those pipeline coaches. Had a great conversation, 2 great conversations with Aaron Glenn. Had great conversations with a number of other guys that you guys were reporting on who were fan favorites, whether that was Brian Flores or whether that was, I'm a big fan of Matt Nagy as well. I think these guys all get second chances. Might not be, the situation was not going to be the situation in New York, of course, but there are some good football men out there that had experience and some that didn't, that I really enjoyed talking with, some of the younger coaches. So you do a lot of work. You do a lot of work on the roster when you're interviewing for this, and you come to the table with a lot of strong opinions, and you have to have them. You can't worry about offending the ownership or the group who is there if you're like saying you want a quarterback to go or stay, or you want to do something in the draft or whatever. You have to be honest and you have to be confident with it. That's a big deal.
So I definitely want to get your thoughts on this Jets roster. But you mentioned talking with Aaron Glenn. Is that something that's happening? Like, hey, if I got this job, I'd be pushing for you to be the coach. When you say you spoke with Glenn a couple of times, what do you mean by that specifically?
No, I think it happens quite a bit. People just want to get a feel for their communication ability and their skills, and if they hit it off. I mean, that's like anything, right? You get on the phone, and all of a sudden you're talking about philosophy. You're talking about draft philosophy. You're talking about overall offense, defensive philosophy. You're talking about how how that coach would hire his.
Is that because you thought he'd be a great coaching candidate, like if you had say in hiring him, or because the Jets told you, hey, he's someone we're looking at? How do you feel about
this?
Him?
Was not inspired at all by the Jets or initiated by the Jets at all. It was what I thought I needed to do. That's always an important thing, right? Because if there's 5 guys that would be coming to the table, and you were, and I was in that spot to be fortunate enough to be a part of the interviews, I always liked getting ahead of it. I did it with Dan Quinn. I had a really good opportunity to spend time with him. It's sometimes you just can't get to it just in that small time within the interview, and it's nice to develop it. And quite honestly, it's good to develop that relationship and that discussion point, not with 8-10 other people around you, right? That's always important. I do the same thing with players when I'm interviewing. Yeah, we do it all in the group setting, but I also want to pull them aside, and not for any other reason, just to really get a feel one-on-one.
That's interesting. So obviously you felt strongly about Aaron Glenn as a candidate. Speaking with him, he ultimately gets this job. Before we talk about the roster, just your thoughts on the new head coach of the Jets, Aaron Glenn.
Look, I mean, talking with him, what really stood out, and I'm so happy for him, right? I'm so happy for his, he's a tough, driven, focused, hard-nosed guy that I think that your city and I think that your organization, the Jets organization, definitely needs to get him out of that funky area that they might be in right now. And I think he's a guy that he experienced what he experienced in Detroit about staying the course, which I also love, right? And not just taking shots. You saw that with Detroit. They were when Dan Campbell stepped in there were a lot of darts thrown his way. And I think that group of coaches stayed consistent. And I think I feel like he's going to really do that, meaning he's going to hire the people he feels comfortable with. He's going to communicate clearly with Darren Mougey, for Mougey and Aaron to be communicating regularly is going to be a massive part of that, especially 2 guys in their first year in those roles. I did it with Mike Smith when I first got to Atlanta. It's not an easy time, believe me. There's a lot involved, and you as a head coach and GM, you're working like crazy to keep your head above water, right? Because it's easy to get immersed in everything. I think those guys are guys that have the presence about them, and they're not easily moved. I mean, Aaron Glenn, he's a consummate pro, and Mougey has been around, and he's got an air about him and a toughness about him, again, that I mentioned, and an understanding about football. So they're going to work off of each other well. And I like where you're going with him, and I think that's going to be a fun thing to watch him develop.
We're talking with Thomas Dimitroff, former general manager of the Falcons. He was the first guy to interview for the Jets GM job. You also had an interview with the Titans as well. So once again, I don't understand why GMs don't seemingly get second opportunities. You and I talked about this last year in Vegas. Head coaches can get a second opportunity, but GMs don't. And, I'd vote for you to be involved with the Jet organization in some capacity. I don't know if there's any opportunity to be a part of a front office, but would you consider any other role besides being a general manager?
Yeah, I've talked about that quite a bit. I've been with this company I'm with right now, Sumer Sports, and in that role as you introduced me as, and I know it's been great. I've widened my aperture with regard to how I would want to run a football team. And I think right now you have to be very cognizant of how organizations are looking to bring in their general managers. And it used to be when I got to Atlanta, Arthur Blank expected me to come in, and he expected me to do much more than just build the football team. He expected me to run 10 other departments, from video to player operations to game day, whatever it may be. There are many, many things that you're responsible for, along with cap and contract, etc. Teams are starting to narrow that down a little bit more, and they're dividing tasks a little bit more. And I think the number one things that people are looking for right now is a team builder, i.e. roster evaluator, scout at the core. I don't think, even though you guys had, the Jets had some people that were interviewing from different realms, right? I mean, I think it was Mike Greenberg. He also interviewed. And,
sure.
And Alec Hallaby from the Eagles. Yep. So they weren't by trade, they're not evaluators, but they were bringing all these people in to interview. There was a stretch and a wide range.
Are you following it like everyone else, like we are as fans? Are you like, oh, they interviewed another person today? And I can't even imagine what you're thinking as you were the first guy to interview for the job in the first place.
Well, I think what you do is you tend to go on your phone, and unfortunately the AI part of your phone just keeps bringing up stuff with the Jets. I had to tell the agent I work with Trace Armstrong, who's fantastic. And he just said, man, you gotta keep your head away from there. There is a function on the phone that allows you to wipe out the former hits. But long and short of it is, yeah, you keep an eye on it. But I mean, ultimately, you can't for 6 or 5 weeks. You'd be knocking your head against the wall. They did tell me when I left. Mike Tannenbaum said, like, look, this is gonna be a long process. Have patience in it. And again, those guys did a very diligent job. I'm talking about Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman, and they know football. So they're able to provide, strong information. It doesn't matter whether I'm there or not. That's the process. And the league needs that. The league needs legitimacy, I think, in the selection process. You don't just throw it out to random people in your building, right? Because a lot of people have ulterior motives. I've been around that before. If there are people in the building that are trying to keep their job, they're not going to want certain people to come in. Right. I think you have to have a very open mind to how you go about the interviewing process. And I think the Tannenbaum-Spielman approach helped them be pretty open about that.
So Jet fans should feel a little better about the 3013's involvement. That's good to hear. Now, as far as this roster goes, you brought up the quarterback situation. I'm someone that looks at this team, and I look at the talent that's still there and go, hey, if the right coach could come in, why can't that coach harness the talent that's on this roster? And this team could be competitive next year. There's a reason why so many people thought they were going to be good this past year. What was your assessment of the roster, of the quarterback situation when you were in there, basically laying out your plan for what you would do if you were the GM?
Look, I'll laud Joe Douglas on his ability to put that roster together. I like Joe a lot. I think a lot of him. I know evidently it was time. I'm not getting into an argument about that at all, but there are some legit pieces on that roster to build with. You know that. I think most people know it. There's some tough decisions to make, free agency decisions to make, and eventual signings, when you're going to re-sign. Those are going to be complicated. That said, I think on the quarterback side, and I've said this around here, I've been outspoken about it or open-minded about it, to say, look, I say categorically Aaron Rodgers is one of the best to ever play the game. Have a great deal of respect for him. This is not about all this, the niceties. It's what I believe. I believe in watching a ton of video on him. He can still play and he can still win. He can still make throws off balance. He can still make off-camber throws, whatever you may want to call it. He can zip balls in at certain levels. I know he wasn't going deep. I understand there was a lot, more sort of short, intermediate, underneath elements. He can play. I think he could go to another team and win for a year or two and continue to help that team. My personal opinion is, given everything, that's what I would say. I would say it would be best that he goes somewhere else and he sort of rekindles this last final steps that he has, because again, he's unbelievable at a lot of levels. We know that. Give him his due, right? Give him his respect. So it'll be interesting. Some people ask me, well, if you say all that, why wouldn't you keep him?
That was my follow-up, especially because in theory, and you can speak to this as a GM, if you do keep Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams probably wants to come back and is willing to do a more team-friendly deal, and then all of a sudden you have a wide receiver room of Garrett and Devontae, and you have a competent quarterback who threw 28 touchdowns this past year. Like, I see your point. You're saying he still could play, but why, as a Jet fan, would I say, okay, well, why not let him play for the Jets as the bridge quarterback, and maybe you drive someone that's behind them?
My personal feeling on that is, as I parallel it with Atlanta, we had to go in there and make some really tough decisions on moving people out of the organization who were bona fide and legitimate enough contributors. They were on the tail end of their career, like Aaron is. And that my parallel was, we made some strong decisions that weren't easy. They weren't easy for the fan base. I wasn't as concerned about that as I was the roster. And I had to deal with a lot of that, whether that was D'Angelo Hall or whoever it was on our group during those times. We made tough decisions. It had everything to do with the energy and the communication and the camaraderie of that group. And it just seems like, for the clean start, for that organization to truly resurrect and to rekindle and do all that they need to do, it's best to move on from that situation, understanding that there's still, of course, talent. And that, I get that's not easy to comprehend, but I am a huge believer in the team and the locker room being very, very intact. You have some guys there for sure. There are other guys that don't. There was a lot of banter about that. And I think you have to really dig into that. I wouldn't really have made that decision until you get in there, truly dig in with the coaches.
You'd want to talk to Aaron too, I'd imagine, too, if you were the GM, right?
Well, I sit there. That's the other thing I'd say. The caveat is, Aaron Glenn comes in there. There's two former, one former football player who was an all-pro, did all this thing. For him to sit down and talk to Aaron Rodgers, that's a big deal. He might come away saying, I could do this for another couple of years, to your point. And then maybe draft a guy, bring him in and be around Aaron. I don't know. But there are ways to approach it.
How big of a factor is his contract and potential dead cap ramifications? If you only have Aaron for one more year, all of a sudden you're dealing with a dead cap in 2026 that affects what you want to do building the roster.
No, that's big. I mean, you're talking about a lot of money. I mean, nearing $50 million on dead cap money. There's a lot. They're a tough decision. That's the same with some of the other guys you mentioned there. I mean, Devontae Adams, if he stays or goes, and what you free up by moving on, what will you free up by moving on from a couple of people, right? There's some difficult decisions, trying to make decisions on some of the free agents, as we mentioned. All in all, I think you're not in a panic mode with regard to the roster. It's more, you need to go in. I think as a general manager, they need to go in, and a head coach, and they need to make every effort to get the respect back to that organization that they deserve. And I really believe the Jets can do that. And I think they can be a quality, top-notch organization. They need to be that, right? That city needs it, and the fan base needs it, and Woody Johnson wants that, right? So he obviously has the people in there that need to go and drive back to Atlanta. Again, we did all we could, and I felt, humbly, within 6 to 8 months, we started garnering a lot of really cool comments and a lot of, we gained a lot of respect from people because of the way we were handling things and the way that we were continuing to build. And that's a massively important thing. You want coaches to come there. You want players to come there. Most importantly, you want management to come there. That's a big thing. And I think this is a start to get that back, of course. But it takes time and it takes a lot of effort.
Couple quick hitters for you. When you were in the interview process with the Jets, did you get a sense that they were looking for a certain answer when they asked you the question about what you would do with Aaron Rodgers? Did you get a sense that Woody Johnson was open-minded to hearing out whatever your plan would be in that scenario?
Yeah, I felt Woody Johnson was very open. I didn't feel like he was coming at me trying to lead me down a line, which I thought was very positive with the interaction. So yes, I personally think that, Mougey's going to come in there. Mougey's going to come in there, and he's going to get the opportunity to lead that team from that side of it and do what he needs to do. That's why they brought him in, because they have a great deal of respect in his ability to evaluate, and he's going to have to make some big decisions along with, of course, Aaron Glenn.
What worries me as a fan, and I'm not saying it can't work because I hope it does, is you have a first-time head coach, first-time general manager with a franchise that has a 14-year playoff drought. They have not won more than 7 games in a decade. I mean, yeah, you studied the organization, you know all this, but why should I feel confident that, hey, 2 first-timers coming into New York, they're the right people to get this franchise finally back on track?
Well, again, knowing the 2 men, and I don't know Aaron Glenn that well, but my interactions with them and the people that I do know, because I did a lot of research on that group, and he was one of them. And I would just reassure the fan base, like, you guys know him as a player, of course, and I mean, how he was coveted around the league, not just by the Jets. I mean, whether
I do love that he wanted the job. Like this was his dream job.
I think so. And I think it's Mougey's dream job, as I understand. I mean, so you're getting two legit football guys, not saying that you haven't had that in the past. I mean, Joe Douglas was a legit football guy. I get that. This is fresh. This is new. They come in. Hopefully they're given an opportunity to lead the team as the football men there. That's a big, big deal, right? In today's world, you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to push back. And I think both of those guys have the ability to push back when appropriate. And push back doesn't mean disrespectfully. It just means you hired me for a reason to be the best football person you can be as a GM and as a head coach. Give us the keys. Let us do our job. And you all have to be confident, I think, as a fan base, that's going to be granted to them. And again, I say this, I don't know if I said it in this pod earlier on. I have a great deal of respect for Jaime Elhaj. Did I already say that?
You did.
Yeah, and I think Jaime's going to be a really important part of this as well. And that's going to be important how this is kicked off, of course.
Real quick, just on Jaime, because he's kind of unknown to a lot of members of the Jet fan base. What exactly does the team president do? What do you believe Jaime Elhaj's role with the Jets will be now with this new regime?
Well, I don't know what it will be besides the fact that I think what Jaime is and what Jaime represents as a president around the NFL, he's got great respect. Another thing, this is three men that are really in charge of getting it to where it needs to be, right? Along of ultimately answering to the owner and Christopher, of course. Jaime's role is he is a definite contact and liaison between the football people and the owner, although they directly report, as I understand, to Woody Johnson. He's such an important part of the interaction. It's imperative that you have a communicative relationship as a head coach and a GM, especially a GM to a president. There's so much stuff. All those other departments we're talking about, the interaction on the salary cap, that president is wildly important in today's world. You're seeing it now. There's also now, he's the president of the organization, remember. They're now saying more. You just saw it with Tony Baselli down in Jacksonville. He got named as the president of football operations.
Which, by the way, many Jet fans were hoping that in some capacity that maybe would be your role. Someone who's seasoned, experience, been now with analytics, with Sumer Sports. You've kind of done everything in your football life.
I think that's going to happen a little bit more. I think that is one that is going to be attractive to people like myself. If they're not hiring the experienced at the GM level, to be, and I mentioned this before, I've been outspoken even before I got back into dipping my foot in most recently on this, that is an ideal spot for a number of us who have, I have 13 years, 13 drafts and 13 free agencies, right?
You scouted in the CFL back in the day. You've done it all in football.
There's a lot that can be helpful when you're in that situation. As long as that head coach and that general manager understand that president of football operations is there ultimately tied to them, hoping that they work. You can't have someone go in there who's like flipping the switch all the time. That's the thing you can't have. I have always said there's got to be a way that you bring that person in and you link that president of football operations contract to the head coach and to the head coach and the GM, so that they feel comfortable. They know we're all in this together. That means that guy who's coming in as a president of football operations is not sitting there thinking about 5 contracts and working till he's 70.
Right.
It's about the here and now, and the NFL is the here and now. So I think that's a way to approach it. So again, the two men understand that we're in this together, because the last thing you need is a president to come in and the head coach and the GM are having their own silent meetings and they don't want to deal with that person. It defeats the purpose.
Makes a lot of sense. Before we go, you're the president of Sumer Sports. You still are deeply involved in working with NFL teams. Now my understanding is NCAA teams as well. Can you tell the audience what you're doing currently?
Yeah, so I've been involved with Sumer Sports, which is a data football analytics company. It is a roster management company. Remember, we're not doing game time decision making, although we have an arm of our business. We have 75 people now. We started with 3 back in 3 years ago. We're growing like crazy. We have 5 former general managers, and then we also have a number of personnel directors and scouts that create all of our subjective scouting. So 800 college grades a year, as well as 2,200 pro. So we do the entire league every year. And then we have 45 plus data analysts and engineers that are working on all of our algorithms. We pull that all together. We're a really, I say cool. We are cool. We're a very intelligent group of people on both the football and the data side that creates something that very few third parties are doing right now. And we're our B2B, our business to business is obviously NFL. And it's also the NCAA right now, right? There's a lot of work to be done on the NIL and portal work that, a company like ours can be a part of. So we're excited about it. but, and not no buts, we're excited about it. And the opportunity to interview was big for me, and I appreciate it. I think about evaluating talent, and I think about building a football team every day of my life. And I realized that over the last year, I had stayed away from putting my name in it. I realize how important that is. And if it comes again and there's another opportunity, great. I love working with Sumer, and I think we can do great things in the interim. That's where I am.
I'll tell you what, I hope Darren Mougey is really good, because as a Jet fan, I want to see this team succeed. But I mean, I have a hard time believing that you wouldn't have been great for the job as well, Thomas. I appreciate you hopping on, and great to get some insight on the whole process.
I hope it helped. Thanks.
He's Thomas Dimitroff. My name is Jake Asman. Make sure you guys continue to follow Sumer Sports. We'll take a quick break. Check the channel throughout the day. More content coming your way. He's Thomas. I'm Jake. We're live at Radio Row here in New Orleans.